And we really appreciate you putting together these educational opportunities for us as security professionals. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to each of you today. So my goal today is that you gain a little bit of education, some reminders, maybe a few golden nuggets. As Kim said, there's a lot going on in our world. And so appreciate all that you do in helping to make our world a little bit better place. Just briefly about Kforce. Many of you probably have not been intimate with Kforce. We're about a $1.3 billion company. And we really focus in the technical area, the IT area, and finance and accounting. And we have an advanced services area where we come in, not only, by the way, do we provide consultants, about $30,000 a year, and do permanent placements. We also do advanced services where we come in with a team of individuals. Maybe you need to stand up a new website, and we can bring in many developers and manage that project to meet your needs, etc. So Kforce is a great company that's being very successful with our consultants, our clients, and it's a great place to work. So with that, just briefly, how many of you have heard something like, oh, we get too many security alerts, or bulletins, I should say, too many phishing emails, and I just clicked on a phishing email, or something like security is too intrusive or make our systems too slow, cause too many hassles. Well, we had an employee who had a response to that, and this was on his cubicle, and this always made me chuckle. If you're doing your job, we are not doing ours, and so we always got a kick out of that. Now, as Kim mentioned, it's the practical security in an impractical world. The definition of impractical really is that it's not sensible or realistic. It does not work well in practice. And there's so much coming at us that being practical is very important. And so when you think of practical, then this is being concerned with actually doing it, and not with theories and ideas, but it's sensible, realistic. It gets the job done the way it needs to be done. And so we're going to focus on that today. Well, this, in the background, you can see this is Citalta in Italy. This is called the Upper Town in Bergamo, Italy. And it's a beautiful area. You can see they're about 60 feet or 20-meter tall walls. And in the lower left corner, you can see a gate that you had to go through. So when we think of, we're going to talk about the evolution of warfare briefly, that when people fought with rocks and clubs, to get through something like this, you had to be right at the gate, right? And then we have medieval warfare, where we have bows and arrows and armor and swords, etc. And so imagine trying to get through that. You had to get really close to this fort. In fact, eventually you'd have to get through the wall. Then as warfare advances, we have gunpowder. So we have guns, we have cannons, and you don't have to be quite as close, but you still have to be in the vicinity. And so it's taking for months to get to where you're wanting to go, and to weeks. Then we advance further and warfare takes flight. Now, after a couple-hour flight, you get to your destination. But then we have advanced warfare with aircraft carriers and dozens of planes that are able to fly from an area, fulfill their mission, come back, refuel, rearm, and it's much faster. But it's weeks to prepare, and at least many minutes, if not an hour or two, to get there. But wait, there's more. Now we have stealth planes and intercontinental missiles that can attack from a variety of places and be controlled in different ways. And so a city like Citalta, it has no defenses against that type of warfare. And in fact, it would have to defend itself prior to that. to that launch or that type of activity. Well, if we think about finance and data, think about years ago, if I were to rob a bank, I'd have to physically be at the bank, get into the safe, and to be able to attain all that money. The same if I were to steal intellectual property. I'd have to be at that old factory and physically gain access to that factory to steal that intellectual property. So now we fast forward and we have data centers that probably weren't as powerful as my smartphone, and we could connect via modem at a blazing speed of 1200 baud. Now, fortunately, for those of you thinking that I am not old enough to have used that type of modem, but that's how we connected. And that, fast forward, we get to this internet era where we can connect any device, anytime, anywhere. And as you think about that, in today's world, unfortunately, there's wonderful uses of the internet. There's also evil uses of the internet, right? And so there's the plan, there's the attack that you can attack again from anywhere. And sometimes the challenge is, who are the attackers? And we know there's nation state attackers, there's organized crime, there's hacktivists, there's individual criminals. Maybe we as IT or security professionals, we may do something to inadvertently, for example, cause our own DDoS attack, etc. So that's a little bit of our world, but the challenge with this is now we're talking about seconds and milliseconds. We're not talking about months and weeks and hours or days and hours to do an attack. Now it's in milliseconds, and that creates a very big challenge for us. So just want to briefly talk about some reminders as we get started. Information security is all about the data. And the beauty of our transformational activities that we're doing in business and digitization is it's any device, anytime, anywhere. And as you recall, information security, we have the CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the confidentiality have the principles such as need to know, least privilege, remove access when no longer needed. And we can also do when and where to have those additional security controls, which are important. When we think of integrity, this is about the data being in a state that is as it is intended. It doesn't change either intentionally or unintentionally, or no longer the truth that we can rely on. For example, imagine in a medical facility, if the dose of someone's medicine gets changed, or their condition is changed, or the type of surgery is changed, then we have a challenge with integrity. And some people consider integrity not that big a deal, but it is. Consider this. Oh my, that is a typo. So you were expecting the collagen injection in your lips and the liposuction on your hips. Well, that's always humorous to me. And integrity really is important. And we think of availability. And this is having the data available when and where. It's your business continuity, disaster recovery, business resiliency, your backups, restorations, etc. To top it all off, we live in a world where we have seemingly endless data storage. And it can be stored in so many places. And that creates such big challenges for us. But there's even more of a challenge because our relationships with our data and our devices has evolved and has become very complex. In fact, we're very worried about the ultra convenience of access to data, to our information, and whatever we enjoy, whatever type of app we enjoy on our phones or computers, tablets, etc. And so we've become more digitized, and we've created more attack vectors. Remember that when we're getting something for free, we are the product. Our information is the product. And so that's where they're making their money. So there's this delicate balance between data and security. And where is that balance? It's an elusive sweet spot. And so I would submit to you to ask yourself today, is data security an art of compromise? Is that how we've evolved because of the business activity? And is that how we become more effective as security professionals, as leaders, as engineers, analysts, etc.? So lastly, let's talk about threats. There's external threats, there's internal threats. And on our internal threats, we have the intentional data theft type scenario. But the unintentional are things like misconfigured servers or networks and unauthorized cloud storage. I'm just trying to do my job. Not having BCPDR plans, as we've talked about, etc. But then we have these external threats where from anywhere around the world, they can happen to us. But we still have unintentional challenges with external threats, such as a cyber cut or a fiber cut, right? Or some type of natural disaster. So on the East Coast, we're familiar with hurricanes. And so we have those types of challenges that can be unintentional, but then there's the obvious intentional, the theft of intellectual property, social engineering, cyber vandalism, ransomware, different malware, etc. Have you considered this, though? Our business transformation and digitization activities are creating more and more attack vectors, meaning the different methods of how attacks can occur. Our attack surface is being greatly expanded, and our unknown leak vectors have been created potentially. And so it becomes more challenging for us to fulfill our role in protecting the firm or the company or organization that we're part of. I'm all for business transformation and digitization, by the way, and it's important. We are on an exciting journey in Kforce in what we're doing, and many great things are happening. But there are challenges that come to us with that. Before I jump into so Captain Obvious here, yeah, we know that. So what do? I want to talk briefly about an information security approach. For a long time, it was very compliance focused. And that focus was on, we just need to do the bare minimum to be compliant, checklist focused. We're not really focused on business requirements. We're just trying to meet compliance requirements. The challenge is compliance does not equal security. And I would submit that a more effective approach is risk managed. Now, we do have to be compliant, by the way, and we do need to meet those compliance requirements. But that's not how we lead our information security programs. We need to focus on being risk managed, because risk managed allows us to more effectively engage the business and protect the business, and to understand those prioritization areas that are important for the business to be successful. We understand the environment, we would have partners, and being risk managed really helps us to find that sweet spot. So I'm going to walk us through 3 levels of transformation and some ideas that you can consider. And we can't do everything at once, and we will talk about that. But this first level is begin the transformation. Now, one of the important things is that we need to establish an environment of trust within our teams, and also with our leadership, and especially our direct leader. So we need to have that trusting relationship with them, because we need to go through a transformation. We're all at different places, by the way. Some of us here may be starting at what I'm calling level 1, and where we're just building the program and trying to make some changes. Some of us may be in level 2 or in level 3. And so there will be many reminders for all of us as we go through. So the transformation begins. We need to strengthen our security team and really begin to mature the team. What roles and skills do we really need, and educate them based on this risk managed approach, because we will make better decisions. As we all know, policies are the foundation to any good information security program. So we need some type of employee-wide, company-wide acceptable use policy. What are we allowed to do? What should we not do? We also need a policy that establishes our information security program. that outlines the scope, the principles, the security principles, the roles, the responsibilities, and having approval from leadership that, yes, this is the information security program. This begins to give us more teeth in our ability to make the changes and have the influence in the firm that we need. Data classification is very difficult for many companies, but something you do have more control over might be system classification, where your structured data within your systems you may be able to classify. And of course, there's the traditional technical policies like access management, networking system endpoints, and SDLC. Now, excuse me, there's some very important processes. Because we're risk managed, we need to have a risk acceptance process, because if our policies are so loose that we will never violate the policy, then we're not protecting the firm, right? If they're so tight that everything we do violates policy, then our policies aren't business friendly and they're not the right policies. And so there needs to be a process where, as a group, whether it's IT or a business unit, where they can have a risk acceptance process and the right level of individuals in the firm approving that level of risk. Of course, the higher the risk, the higher level in the firm it would go for that approval. And then a risk assessment process of just basic what could happen if we take this action, or we change how we do different things. And so that's very important. And then we really need a threat and vulnerability management, even just basic rudimentary patching. We all know patching is important. That's an important conversation, obviously, to make sure we're patching well, and doing basic scanning to identify our vulnerabilities, especially when we look at external first. And then the basic technologies that you see there, firewalls, antivirus, most likely we all have those. Email security is so important, as phishing is the biggest threat to most of us. And web browsing is a big threat. And so those are some important technologies to help us move forward. Now, in this level 1, as we become more risk managed, we're going to see a lot of things that we need to do. And so here's some things from experience, from talking to others, that we should consider. 1, we're not going to be able to lead from our office. Now, in level 1, it's not as important, but in level 2 and 3, it is. Things we don't want to do, we don't want to treat data and systems with the same level of confidentiality or try to secure everything the same, and we cannot do everything at once. And remember, it's better, it'll not be often where you can do 100% of something. And so 70% is better than 0%. And so take the advantage of those wins that you can have, and then further mature those wins as your organization matures. We can't do it all ourselves. Do not hide bad news or risks, because remember, the benefit of being risk managed is that others can help share the challenges of those risks and the responsibilities for that. So that's level 1. As we go to level 2, then it is important that we begin to focus on maturity and more about the people around us and partners. So we've really been establishing our security program in level 1. But the journey for information security never ends, right? It is constant. So some thoughts on level 2, maturity. We feel like we're in this whirlwind, right? There's so much happening all around. There's so many new vendors out there, so many sources of information, and there's things going on in our business, and trying to keep it all straight is very challenging. So where should we focus? Well, as you're maturing, and those of you who may be at this conceptual level 2 area, we've continued to mature our security team. We establish strategic partnerships, which we'll talk about. We enhance our policies. Our processes need to become more and more mainstream within our business and our company organization. And our security controls mature. Awareness and training, we all know that's very, very important. And so we get a solid awareness and training program, and we continue to enhance tools and optimization. When we think of partnerships, There's internal partnerships and external partnerships because together really is power. And so those partnerships are important. And you consider the IT, legal, and HR, especially being important as we begin those strategic alliances. But we also have external partnerships as well. That could be our MSSPs, our third-party counsel or outside counsel, incident response firm, etc. But there's also many activities in level 2. I'd like to start on the right-hand side, where we continue to enhance our and mature our policies. Our security incident response process is really important. And so we need to establish that here. And if we don't have that expertise, then hopefully we're able to bring someone in who can help us and establish that. Further establish our SDLC. Third-party risk management, I'll come to that in a moment. I talk more about that. Access management just becomes more and more as we have these different trust relationships, federation and BYOD, and you have the concepts like zero trust that are very important in that. Of course, our backups, hardening our systems like CIS benchmarks, monitoring 24/7. A brief story about third-party risk management. So this is the assessment of vendors. We stood this up, and we had it'd been going okay, and we came to a really important juncture, if you will, or a fork in the road, where we were standing up an application for one of our corporate entities that they'd been trying to justify and get financial commitment for several years. They finally got it. They were very excited, moving forward, and they needed to go through what we call our critical information vendor process, where we assess the security capabilities of those vendors. And we did with this vendor. They had many good things in place, but there were 3 areas that were concerning to us. So we follow our risk assessment process that identifies these 3 areas. The level of risk was high enough that I had to approve it, and my boss had to approve it with my recommendation that we have other people approve it because this was some very sensitive data. That ended up a conversation with our CFO, the person in charge of our finance area for the firm, and so we had senior VPs there, and he looked at me and said, "Rex, tell me about these risks and what are your recommendations?" So I explained the risks and the recommendation, which was that we include these 3 areas in the contract. They will have it done in a specified period of time. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but one was maybe like 30 days, 90 days, and 180 days. And he said, "Okay, that sounds great." Now, people were shocked because we had to sign the contract immediately, or we would lose this great pricing. But he supported us in that, in the right, as far as the risk, because he could have accepted the risk, and that's okay. My big thing is kind of look me in the eye and let me know that you understand the risk to move forward. And so that was a big step for our vendor management process in evaluating third-party risk. Now, technologies, you're maturing. You have these security events going on in your environment, and setting up a SIM is really important. And data loss prevention, what's going on with your key data and your sensitive data, encryption, CASBs, there's so many things to do, but again, we can't do them all at once. And so what's important for you? And remember this, we need to manage what we build. That is so key. Well, data protection concepts, right? Where is our data? We need to know where it's at. We talked about data loss prevention. Protection really requires everyone, and leaders need to be involved. Again, I would suggest many times we've got to start by meeting in the middle and master the art of compromise. And so you think of our cyber warfare that now is in seconds and milliseconds, that we've got to continue to make progress. And that's where that art of compromise comes in. Awareness and training. Who do we train? What do we train on? Becomes very, very important. There's so many good sources for awareness and training out there. And then the risk assessment process. We utilize the NIST guide for conducting risk assessments, and we Kforce sized it, if you will, a little bit, but it has great guidelines to really help stand that up. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. Now, one thing to note, as you've been on this progression from level 1 to level 2, you have created a bit of a stir in your organization. And executives are much more aware of you and the investment we're making in people and technology and processes. If you have a board of directors or a governing body, they're more aware. And so there needs to be a way to identify, are we doing the right things? How mature are we? How mature do we need to be? And so I'd like you to consider these 3 words: accountability, transparency, and trust. We will talk more about those, but think about those words as we go into this next area. And so we need a maturity model, a way to assess. There is no one right model for everyone. And each model has strengths and weaknesses. So what's best for you? A generic model that you see on the right from 0 to 5, and there's many different types. But you want a model that is consistent, that you can come back and assess 2 or 3 years later to see how well you are progressing. So if you're on this journey that we're on today, we chose for us, because we've been on this journey that we've talked about, the NIST CyberSecurity framework. It has 5 functional areas. It is based on risk processes and risk management, which is important because that's how we want to manage information security. And then it had scoring tiers, and from 1 to 4. So that was important. So if you go through that, you may get some report back. Of course, it has a lot of information that looks something like this, where you have the different functions. And by the way, there's categories and subcategories to each of these. And I believe there's around 220, give or take. So it's fairly comprehensive. I really like the NIST cybersecurity framework. But you'll have scores when you get back that you're doing better in some areas, and other areas have greater opportunities for improvement. And depending on your business model, recovery may not be real important to you. And so you may not need to be really good at business continuity and disaster recovery, but you need to go through that process with your eyes open. Now, level 3. This is your time to lead, to really protect revenue and profit and help your firm be successful. So we talked about the principles of leadership, this accountability and transparency and trust that's really critical. And so accountability, we need to be accountable for the success of the information security program, but we also help other leaders around our organization be accountable. And risk managed security really helps us with that. Transparency, that is also such a facilitator because people need to know, how are we doing? Where is it at? We have so much going on, and we need help from a variety of areas. And by doing these things, we develop that environment of trust, because trust is so important. And this quote by Patricia Aberdeen: transcendent values like trust and integrity literally translate into revenue, profits, and prosperity. I can tell you that the trust, a book I enjoy is called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M. Covey, I think, the son of Stephen R. Covey, for those familiar with some of his books. And it talks about the speed of trust. And I'll give you a quick example in patching that generally is a challenge for many companies when they start out, where it may take weeks and months to convince somebody that we have an urgent patch to go through. And there's all these reasons we can't do it. You're making it bigger than it needs to be. It's not that important. But developing that environment of trust, where then you can have conversations that take minutes to make the decision to go through and patch those systems that are at great risk. And so that's just a brief example of trust going from weeks and months down to hours and minutes in making those decisions. So really that speed of trust is so important. And so you need to lead as a business partner. And by the way, this isn't just for CISOs. You're a manager, you're an engineer, you're an analyst, you work in the GRC side of security and versus the technical side of security. We're all leaders, and we need to lead with that and become intimate with the business and transform our organization from security focused to business focused. And we cannot lose the discipline we gained in level 1 and level 2, our importance of our policies, our processes, and keeping our technologies optimized. It's a challenge when we're in level 2 for a long time. By the way, level 1, you're in there for probably a couple of years, and level 2, you're in there for many years as well. It's a journey that takes time when you're having to mature your organization as well as your IT team and your security team. We talked about the importance of business partnerships, but we want to integrate policies into business processes. This is why we really become more and more mature and secure. And security being involved in projects and continue to enhance our education. Excuse me. So, and we need to be an organizational leader, secure at the speed of business. So having your reports and metrics and dashboards, scorecards, et cetera, to communicate with your executives or your organizational leader. And because remember, they own the significant risk decisions, not you. I have been there where I put that on my shoulders, and that is tough. And that is not the right thing to do to me, nor is it the right thing to do for the firm. Those risk decisions need to have visibility and go upward. We started a cybersecurity council. We actually called it the Information Security and Data Privacy Council, where we have a charter, we have established attendees, they provide guidance, they provide their advocates and sponsors, they have business insights as well as our corporate back office. And so that is very important. So if we fast forward from level 2 to level 3, and we're 3 years later, we may come back and have goals that we tried to reach. And maybe our goals are like 2.5, 275, et cetera, in each of these functional areas of the NIST cybersecurity framework for us. And these are fictitious numbers, by the way. And then you have the areas maybe that you chose to focus on. For example, under identify, there's policies, there's asset classification, there's vendor management. These are areas you may have chosen to focus on so that you can go from maybe a 1.5 to a 2.5 in that established time frame to do that. Now, communications with the board is very important. And that's where these cybersecurity, we have a summary page for cybersecurity highlights. What does the threat landscape look like? Any noteworthy incidents, which hopefully there aren't any. What areas are we focusing on? And we have a risk dashboard. I'll show you an example of one that it could look like. But we also have some third-party assessments or security ratings that we continuously track and report to the board. And you may have a special activity like an annual pen test report that you had a third party do on your behalf, and you share those results with your board. And this could be, example of just a simple high-level roadmap that you would show executives that we're concentrating in these 10 areas or 15 or 20 areas over the next 3 years. Here's our roadmap and the items and the status and when will it be done, progress, comments, etc. So just showing an example of that. Here's a risk dashboard that can have different capability areas, the key risks, and what is your risk level? Is it a high risk, a medium, or low risk? And what is the risk trend? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it about the same? And so this type of scorecard becomes very helpful to communicate. Again, don't worry about the detail here. It's really showing a 4-quarter trend in some key areas that we've identified, such as threat management, phishing activity, education and training, etc. Now, in summary, let me identify and remind you of some things that will help us as we together move forward and try to do the things that our firm needs us to do. Some success factors. You've heard me talk much about this risk-managed approach and the importance of that. We need executive support. we need to make sure that we can establish a risk tolerance or desired maturity level if we use a maturity assessment such as NIST, because that gives us and the business that guidance we need to secure to that level. Because many of us are not a bank, we're not the Department of Defense. We may not need that quite that level of security. So what level do we need? We talk about transparency and policies and the importance of a secure, aware culture, and that is definitely a journey we take. Executives speaking about things such as not clicking on phishing emails in worldwide broadcasts, for example, or company-wide broadcasts for your firm is very important. And your ability to communicate, focus on the critical systems, have effective processes, become more and more business intimate, and prioritize with balance, and keep these commitments and manage them carefully. Now, part of that, maintain maturity and grow, right? Stay current on threats. That's not easy to do, easier said than done. And manage the security and risk. And you really want a successful team culture. We talked about the maturity models and the partnerships, and never violate trust. We want to build that environment of trust because at some point we're going to misstep and not have covered tracks, not meet timelines, etc. And we want them to give us the benefit of the doubt, knowing that our skin's in the game to do what we need to do. And of course, fulfill the roadmap that you have. Now, what about you as a security professional? One, you need to take care of yourself, because if you're like most of us, you have more to do than you can ever do. So take care of yourself, be patient with yourself, do not hesitate to get help, and celebrate and track progress. Remember, you got to start from where you are. There are no shortcuts to this. And manage and keep commitments and choose your battles wisely. Prioritize with balance. Now, final thoughts. A couple quotes. Security is like the brakes in your car. It slows you down, but it also makes it possible for you to go a lot faster. Dr. Henson. And just a reminder, we are all in this together, and you don't have to go it alone. We need partnerships, things like FutureCon, where we can get together, network, and get to know each other a little better, learn a few things. These types of events are very helpful. And lastly, just my own thoughts on information security is a journey that requires insightful navigation. The destination will continuously change and evolve. Therefore, we must continuously evolve, and we must lead and secure at the speed of business. So thank you, folks, very much. And Kim, welcome you back. And any thoughts or questions that we may have from our audience today?
Okay. We do have a few questions, and you can hear me, right, Rex?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I have Tony said third-party risk management is extremely important. We are continually looking at ways to improve this process because the risk could be our risk. So then someone said, have you explored the use of continuous monitoring of your vendors?
That's a great question, and you are correct. The role that we play in evaluating our vendors is becoming more and more important. And so a couple thoughts on that. One, we have explored continuous monitoring, and we use a company that provides that continuous monitoring, and we get alerts. And especially if there's a significant change in what's going on with our list of vendors that we're tracking. And secondly, as we are working with those vendors, remember they're contributing to our security supply chain, right? So very, very astutely, Tony, you talked about their problems are our problems, and you're exactly right. And so they need to contribute to our security supply chain as they become partners of ours or vendors with that. But continuous monitoring is helpful, and we've been utilizing that for a little while now, and we enjoy getting those alerts and those changes for those vendors. Good question.
So Michael said, this is very helpful summary presentation, which is entirely appropriate level for a keynote. Will the slides be available? And some of his summary slides would be useful for explaining this to the non-security folks.
Yes, we will make the slides available.
Okay, so we can help all the attendees out with that. We will we'll post them on the pre-record. Right. So they can get it. And then we had, what is the number one security device or software program no business should be without?
Well, if you ask 10 people, you'll probably get 10 different answers. You know, that's this may sound like a cop-out. It's not meant to be. That really depends on your business and what's important to you. Do you have highly valuable intellectual property like an Apple or an HP? Are you retail focused, and so credit cards is very important to you? Are you a medical facility, and so your PHI information is important to you, et cetera? So all of those come into play. And one technology to do without, boy, that is that is difficult in today's world. But one of the up and coming, or I shouldn't say up and coming, just we're seeing the benefit of it more and more, is like EDR, and there's new acronyms for it, XDR, et cetera. But EDR is very important. But I think the SIM is one of those things that you can't do without, because you need eyes on what's going on in your organization and the ability to collect all of those millions or billions of events every month into an area where they can be correlated and bring to the top those things that could be security incidents and being alerted on those. And so that's a great question. And I don't have a great answer, but a SIM is one of those things that comes to mind that you really need to have a SIM.
Well, we still have some more questions. I always know when our keynote did a great job when there's tons of questions. So some pretty broad questions. This person said, Craig said, what is the greatest internal threat you have seen?
Well, that's a great question. I'll share one thing for you. In a former company, the internal threat is generally employees that want to take data with them to a new job, and the theft of intellectual property. You know, we're living in this pandemic world at home, and I had a situation at a former company where husband and wife were working together at home. They worked for competitors, and she went out to grab some lunch. He got on her computer and stole a bunch of intellectual property. And that was, of course, a big surprise to everyone, and I'm sure including his wife, that he would do that. And so that the biggest internal threat really is the theft of intellectual property. But if you do any type of governmental, federal work, or any type of work associated with Department of Defense in any way, I think a very significant threat is what we may create ourselves based on the type of social media presence we have and what we show online that we do, and that can be a very big threat, either from bribery or used to target you as an individual in the form of phishing, or knowing your browsing habits to compromise a certain website that you go to, etc. So that's a great question, Craig, on the internal threats, because they're real, and we have to be aware of those.
Well, I wonder if that couple is still married.
I've wondered that myself.
Well, then I just have lots of people saying thank you, great presentation. If anybody has any other questions for Rex, if you go into the network lounge, you can find Rex and you can just post your questions there. So thank you so much, Rex. That was a great presentation, and we thank you for taking the time. I know you're a super busy CISO, so I appreciate you spending the time. with us today. And again, if anyone has any questions, you can just go to the network lounge. So I'm going to let Rex go, and I just have a few announcements. And thank you so much, Rex.
Thank you, Kim. It's been a pleasure. We'll talk to you soon.